And we're back in Inside the Ropes, and this week we have a man who has sat at the commentary desk and called some matches from great wrestlers, from Bret Hart to Hulk Hogan, Goldberg, Ric Flair, and even Booker T versus Buff Bagwell on Monday Night Raw. But I'm sure that's not up there with his career highlights, but he was the announcer for WCW Monday Nitro. He's the one and only Scott Hudson. Scott, welcome to Inside the Ropes.
I'm honored to be here, Kenny. Thanks for having me.
When did you get the call about WCW sort of year-wise?
Christmas, December-ish of 1995, I got a call. Well, the whole story is, at my real job, I'm at a Christmas luncheon. You know, every year you get dressed up and go to a nice restaurant and all that. Mm-hmm. And so my office also gave out awards to employees. You know, the best this, and not joke awards, but real awards. So I got Employee of the Year, for better or for worse. For my real job. And they gave me the award, you know, a lot of people, nice restaurant, handshake, pictures, the whole drill. And then I go back and sit down at my table, and the waiter comes up and says, you're Mr. Hudson. I said, yeah, what's up? And he said, I got a phone call for you. I thought, okay. So I go to the meter D stand or whatever, and I answer the phone and say, this is Scott. And I just hear, yo, Scooter, this is DDP. And it was Paige, who I knew a little bit from the indie shows around Atlanta. And he said, Eric wants to talk to you. And he handed the phone, and it was Eric Bischoff, and he said, we've got a spot open. I've seen your work. I think you'll do great. Can you come down for an audition tomorrow? Sure. And that was it.
So at the beginning, when you got there, late 95, early 96, what were your first sort of duties for WCW?
When I first got there, I did WCW Pro, and that was all I did. That was the Sunday afternoon show on TBS. I think it was like 5 o'clock. And, you know, that was it. And that show, I never was on a set. I was never anywhere. I was only doing it in studio, in post. And so, I never got to see it. I was never on camera, I'll put it that way. Uh-huh. I was always in the studio with usually Larry Zbyszko calling the matches, you know, watching them on a monitor. I was never in a live show. So that was it. That's where they started everybody off.
And one of the angles in 1996 that I wanted to talk to you about was in September when they did the angle that Sting walked out and, you know, he changed his gimmick and he did the crow thing and he appeared in the rafters. Because I think what people will realise throughout this interview is you're still a massive wrestling fan as well as having worked there. What did you think about that change in his character, going from Sting, you know, being the sort of clean-cut babyface to not being around a lot and being in the rafters? What did you think of that?
I thought it was brilliant, and I'll tell you why I think it's brilliant. Sting, for better or for worse, is never going to be confused with, you know, Shawn Michaels or Kenta Kobashi or, you know, the greatest workers of all time. Sting was a character and could work. He wasn't a poor worker, but he just wasn't going to get out there and have a 5-star match every time he laced up the boots. But the thing that got him over was his charisma. You go back and look at those Sting promos, they weren't that good either. You know, they were just kind of passable promos. Some of them didn't make any sense. I mean, but he had such a charisma that he got over. And Eric, to his everlasting credit, had the idea. He goes, what can we do to get Sting over? He's only getting so hot, but every time we try to put him on top to headline, the buy rates go down, the ratings go down. We need to do something to elevate him to where he can be the top guy. And Eric's idea was, everybody likes Sting. Nobody doesn't like Sting. And so he said, well, Sting can't really work and isn't that great at promos. So how about, to get him over, we have him not work and not say anything. And then he'll be really over. And that's what they did. You know, if you go back and look for that whole build-up to Starrcade 96, or 97, I can't remember which one it was. That
97, yeah.
He didn't, even when he was doing the rafter bit, you know, he didn't say anything. The only thing, I mean, it took months for him to even point that black bat at somebody. And he didn't work. Forget that. Never wrestled a lick. And, you know, and he was never more over than when he said nothing and didn't wrestle. That was the most popular he's ever been. And that was Eric's idea.
And let's kind of get back to you. So we're getting into 1997 by now. Sting's now doing the Crow gimmick, the NWO are kind of on top. By that point, were you doing more than just WCW Pro, or was it still just that show at that point?
By that point, I'm doing, I think I'm doing Saturday Night, as well as Pro and maybe a couple other things. But I think that was the first time I talked to Eric since the phone call at the lunch. He called me at home and said, Scott, it's Eric. I said, hey, what's going on? How's everything? He goes, I just want you to doing a great job. We're very happy. Everything's cool. But I want to ask you something. I said, name it. He said, how would you feel about hosting WCW Saturday Night? I said, like, for a week? He goes, no, being the host. And that, knocked me back on my heels because, it had been Gordon Soley and Tony Shivani since, 1971. Mm-hmm. And I thought, are you serious? Yeah, it's going to be you. If you want it, you start this weekend. I said, hell yeah, let's go. And so that was it. So I was doing Saturday night too. Had a cast of characters rotating in and out of the co-host. Sometimes it was Mike Tenay, sometimes it was Dream, Dusty Rhodes, sometimes it was the Legend. But I was always the one there for those 2 or 3 years.
And I guess when you were starting to work on the Saturday Night Show, one of the characters that came out of that in 1997 was Goldberg when they started the streak. As a fan and as an announcer as well, what did you think about the approach of having this sort of big, tough guy come in and just sort of kill his opponents every week? Did you like that?
Absolutely. It was going to be what we used. It's what Eric used to call bridge booking. He would call it umbrella booking and bridge booking, where we had an umbrella booking, which was the NWO. It was the overarching storyline that impacted every storyline underneath. It was the NWO and whatever was under it. And that's why it grew so big, so they could have, they had that one pay-per-view. It was just them. They went that far with it. Mm-hmm. But the bridge booking was what was going to link the underneath stories. Underneath the NWO. Well, Eric was smart enough to know that the NWO thing wasn't going to go on forever, so he started building up Goldberg, and Goldberg was going to end up being the overarching storyline. We're going to build him up to the top, feed everybody to him. He was going to be the Hulk Hogan of 1985 in WCW 1998, I guess. And so that was a terrific way to use him. And as a comparison, you look at Ryback currently in the WWE, who is so obviously, a knockoff of what we did with Goldberg. And if he's over at all, and I question whether or not he is, he's nowhere near as over as Goldberg was. And it's because we booked Goldberg correctly. He never lost. That was the whole gimmick. And the minute he lost that luster. Well, Ryback has been beaten down by, who knows, Santino Marella, Lillian Garcia, who knows who's beating him up. He's been beaten by everybody. And that's why, we made Goldberg the monster and let him beat up everybody. They tried to make Ryback a monster, and then he gets beaten up. And nobody buys that. That kind of gimmick only has a certain shelf life unless you just build him as this incredible monster. And we built Goldberg perfectly, only to screw it up with that finger poke of doom and all that stuff.
And we actually have something in common. I don't know if you know this. You were part of the DVD on the Montreal Theory, mm-hmm. and a couple of our interviews with Errol Hepner and Julie Hart were a part of that DVD as well. How did you find out that Bret Hart was coming over to WCW? And I guess, why do you think that his run in WCW didn't work? Because there seems to be two lines of thought. One line is that his heart just wasn't in it. The other line of thought is that he just was booked really badly. What do you think?
I never believed until I saw what happened with Bret, who is always tied with Shawn Michaels as my favorite wrestler of all time, Bret Hart. I never can pick between those two, but no one else has ever cracked those spots. He's that awesome to me. But he was a creation of the WWF, not so much as a character, but as a style. When our guys went to the WWF in the Invasion, they didn't get over. They didn't get over at all. And it was, I never believed that theory about working WWF style versus what they call Southern style, which is what WCW did. I never thought that meant anything until I saw what happened with Bret and then what happened with the Invasion angle, that there are two different styles. Not only are there two separate sets of fans, which kind of got blurred there, obviously, toward the end when everybody was touring nationally over and over again, but you go to a WWE show, you're thinking you're going to see one type of match. You don't think you're going to see a WCW match, and vice versa. And that's what happened. Bret came in and worked just as well as he always did. It was just that he was working WWE style and not WCW style, and he just didn't get over. No fault of his own. His work didn't slip one iota. It just was not what WCW viewers and fans and customers and whatever were accustomed to seeing. But, and again, I want to stress, it's not Bret's fault. He gave it everything he had. I don't think there's a matter of his heart's not in it or anything like that. I think he just was destined and doomed not to be as popular in WCW as he was in the WWF, because he was a WWF guy.
And they brought in Vince Russo. In October 1999, when he first came in, was there a vibe? Did people think that he was going to be able to turn it around?
Absolutely. Almost blind loyalty and almost like a faith-like belief that, okay, now, let's see what now we're going to turn. Now we're going to beat the hell out of the WWF. Here we go. It was like no doubt that we were going to win this war. None.
And obviously the last Nitro was March 26th of 2001. When did you find out, and how did you find out that it was going to be the last one?
I found out Thursday before. My dates, let's see, it was the 26th, right? Was the last show?
Yeah.
So that would have been the 19th, 20th, 21st, 28th, the 22nd, that Thursday before.
Mm-hmm.
Up until then, we thought that Eric and this Fuchsia Media group were going to be able to put together a deal and buy the company and keep it up and running. We thought that maybe Jerry Jarrett was going to be able to put together something and come in and take over the company. But we found out that Thursday that that Monday night was going to be the last Nitro. And honestly, the way I found out, I'm sure that there was, I didn't work at the office. I wasn't there every day, all day like everybody else. I had a real job. But how I found out was when I got the calendar for the month of May, there was nothing for Nitro, and there was nothing. Because I checked, we had an online calendar, and I looked at it, and I said, well, let me see what's happening in May. Where am I going? And nothing. It was empty. So that's how I knew.
And take us through the last Nitro. Because I think everybody kind of wonders, from somebody who worked there's perspective, what was it like when you got to the building? Talk us through that day.
Well, like I said, by the time we got there, I knew that it was over. And I knew that the WWF was taken over. So it wasn't like I got there and said, oh, by the way, this is the last show. You don't have a TV show after this. Good luck with everything. It wasn't that. I mean, we knew. And so I get down there. I fly down to Panama City Beach from Atlanta, and that flight is, you don't even have time to get, to sit back in your chair. It's like an hour flight. And so I get down there, grab my rental car, go to the building. And when I get there, you can just tell something is really different. Vince wasn't there. Vince was at Raw, wherever Raw was that night. But Shane was there. Bruce Pritchard was there. Jerry Briscoe was there. So, we met all those guys, and they were terribly nice to us. Just, that's great. And then, they tell us that, we're going to do the first hour of the show, and then Vince is going to take over. Vince McMahon and Raw are going to take over the second hour. So we knew we had 1 hour left of Nitro, Tony and I. Mm-hmm. And we knew that we were going to end with Sting and Flair. And so I said, Tony and I talked, and it was an emotional night. There were tears all over the place from everybody. Because for me, I just went back to my office and went back to my job. For everybody else, that was their job. That was their career. And they, had lost it. And they were going to have to go out and pound the pavement and find new work. And it was an emotional night. But I remember telling Tony, I said, look, this is it. After everything I've been through, and you've been through it, 3 times longer than me, it ends tonight. So, we got to make sure that this is the best that either one of us have ever done. There's no next week. There's no, we'll edit it out in post. This is it. So we went out there and, in my opinion, did the best announcing job that either one of us have ever done that night. And ending it with Sting and Flair was terrific. And then, we turned it over to Vince, and Vince took over. And when our part ended, when Nitro was still technically going on, but we weren't on it, I went backstage, and we were saying all of our goodbyes, and they had this big catering thing, this big party. And, it was kind of sad because, it was the last time you were going to see the crew and, the guys for the most part. And Tony comes up and grabs me, and he goes, "When are you going home?" Back to Atlanta. I said, "I got a flight at, whatever, 6 o'clock in the morning." And he goes, "Screw that. I got a car. Let's go home." So we got our luggage, and about, before Nitro went off the air, we had thrown into Tony's car and drove back to Atlanta. And the whole way back, just me and Tony Shivani in the car, just he and I, swapping wrestling stories for, the 4 hours that it takes to drive down there. That was a lot of fun.
And so after the last Nitro, did you hear from the WWF straight away, or how did that work?
April 2001, it was over, and I honestly thought that was it for my wrestling career. Okay, well, that was fun. That was, 12 years of traveling around, seeing the world, having some fun on TV, and meeting my heroes, and then it's over, and that's over. Then in June, Kevin, I can't think of his name.
Kevin Dunn.
Called me at my house and said, "I want to bring you up for an audition." Basically the same thing Eric told me when I got that call at the restaurant there in 1995. I said, "Sure, I'd be happy to." And so they said, we'll get you a ticket and all this other. So I get up there and I get to LaGuardia. They have a limo waiting for me, drive me, from LaGuardia up through Stamford, up to Stamford, and I meet Kevin Dunn, and he says, "Well, this is what we're thinking about doing. We're thinking about keeping WCW as a separate entity and having a separate show with you as the host, with King as your co-host, Jerry Lawler." Okay, great. He goes, "Well, we got to run you through to make sure you can handle this." All right, whatever, I understand. Let's do it. So I spent a day at the production facilities in Stamford, and they ran me through the ringer. I mean, they are so professional. Kevin Dunn is a really smart guy, good producer, not a slave driver or anything like that, good guy. But they put me through everything. And even to the point where I called, and this part was especially great, I got to call an entire television show with me as the host and Michael Hayes as the color guy. And I am a massive Michael Hayes mark. So that was fun. And all of that. So then I went to, it was over. Kevin comes to me and he goes, "Well, I'll tell you what, we threw everything in the kitchen sink at you and you handled it. So I think we can make this work." I said, "All right, well, terrific." And he goes, "Well, come into the office and let's talk." So I go in there and meet with Kevin and Vince, and they basically tell me, "We can find a spot for you. We want you to do this. We can make this work. This is what we want to do. And you're going to need to quit your job, move your family all the way from Georgia to New York, and you're going to have to take about a 70% pay cut." I said, "No, thank you very much. I'll be leaving." And that was the end of it. And I thought, well, that was fun. That was a quick trip to New York that I didn't think I was going to get. And then 2 weeks later, they called and said, "Okay, we understand, but will you come in and work 2 weeks to do a quick invasion angle to help get it over and help make it seem legit?" I said, "Well, that I can do." So that's when I went out to Tacoma and did SmackDown and Raw with Arn in that abortion of a match with Buff and Booker.
And just sort of finally, we've got some fan questions from our Facebook page, if you don't mind answering them.
I'd be happy to.
Sam Bill, he just wants to know your thoughts on working with Tony Schiavone specifically at the end of WCW. Was he any less enthused at the end? But he also wants to say that he enjoyed you and thinks that you would make a great announcer for TNA.
Oh, well, I appreciate that very much. I'm out of the business, but if I'll put it this way, if I ever go back to doing anything in wrestling in any degree, you can forget me doing a weekly show or anything like that, but if I were to do anything with any group, it'll be TNA. I mean, the end. As far as working with Tony, I didn't notice any difference in working with Tony from the first day to the last. He was a hard-working, passionate, smart man about wrestling, about business, about the wrestling business, which, different things. He was a mentor. I'll tell you a piece of advice Tony gave me early on, and it stuck with me when he told me, which would have been, almost 20 years ago, that I still take, around, because it applies to any sport, and it was this: a good announcer will not bring in one additional viewer, but a bad one will chase away 100. And I believe that. nobody watches wrestling because of Michael Cole. Nobody watched wrestling because of Jim Ross. But a lot of people may have turned away from wrestling because of Michael Cole. I doubt many turned away because of Jim Ross.
Dallas Gridley wants to know what your favorite match or wrestlers were to call.
Anytime I got to call a match, and, I'm not trying to in any way negate or minimize the fact that he is an awful, awful person, but anytime I got to call a Chris Benoit match, I considered it a privilege because it was so fun to watch. And the same goes with Dean Malenko or Eddie. And again, I'm a mark. I fully and freely admit that. And I'm a mark for a lot of guys who I got to call in the ring, and Bret Hart's one of those. I got to go to Bret's house up in Calgary to do a long interview segment for Thunder one night. That was incredible. I got to know Bret pretty well doing that. But I can't think of a specific match because there were literally hundreds of them. Mm-hmm. But if it involved Eddie or Dean or Chris or Bret, or even Jericho. When I say Chris, I don't necessarily mean Benoit, but Jericho as well. Those were just privileges to call because they really tested you. I don't know if you go back and watch those matches without the sound and try to call them yourself, and on top of what move was that? Well, by the time I figured out what move that was, they're 3 moves past that, and then having to give voice to it. It was a real challenge. And again, not knocking Flair or Hogan or Piper, but their matches were pretty much the same. They might be in a different order, and they were all good, but you knew what they were going to do. How many ways can you see boot to the face and a leg drop, 1, 2, 3? It's over, it works, but it's not hard to call. But when you had Eddie and Chris and Dean and Bret in the ring, it really wasn't the same match night after night, and it was a challenge to keep up with it, and I love a challenge like that. I can only imagine what it would be like to work those guys. It was hard enough just calling the match on a mic, much less trying to work it in the ring. And
yeah, so that's kind of most of our questions, but there's one other question I wanted to ask you, and I wanted to get your take on it. I just wondered, what is it about Vince that you're not too keen on?
The way my perception is how he treats his employees. Vince, to his everlasting credit, and I'll say this, I'm the exact same way in my real job. So Vince and I are cut from the same cloth when it comes to that. So I can't really say that it's a bad thing, but I work for the government. I don't have the, dictatorial, authoritative power that he does. I work nonstop. I would work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at my job if it required it. And there have been times that it required at least 24 hours, maybe not 7 days a week. He does that routinely in the WWE. I admire that about him. However, he comes short of demanding, but definitely expects it from his employees. And it's to the detriment of a lot of guys' family life, personal life, professional development, anything. It's like you work for the WWE, I own you, lock, stock, and barrel, 24/7, 7 days a week from now until your contract's over. You can forget having a girlfriend, having a boyfriend, having a house, having a car, having a family, having a mom, having a dad, having Thanksgiving dinner, having this, having that. That's the way he approaches, or at least from what I've heard, how he approaches his employees. If that works and he's making money, God bless America. If it works for him, great. It's just not the kind of environment I would want to work in. It's not what I consider a professional business environment. But when you are the only game in town, you get to dictate the rules. I just choose not to play.
And I guess just to end it on a positive note, I guess Vince won the war, so he gets to rewrite history. But as someone who worked in WCW for all those years, what are your fondest memories of working there, looking back now?
We get asked that. I get asked that a lot. And, we had a 10-year WCW reunion in 2011, where we all got together at Stats Sports Bar here in Atlanta, a pretty big deal place. And everybody that wanted to come could come. You had to be part of a special Facebook group, and they had to let you in, all that, so we could make sure that no hangers-on got in. And there ended up being like 150 people there, and to a man and woman, as we all got back together for the first time in 10 years, we all realized, and we all were in full agreement that, the travel, the money, the prestige, the hanging out with celebrities and all that, none of that do we miss. And I'm one of them. I fully agree. I don't miss any of that. I just miss those people. I miss the crew. I miss the wrestlers, the ones that I don't see anymore. I miss Eric. I miss Vince. I miss Tony and Mark and Mike and Legend and Dream, and I miss Jeff, and I miss all those people. I just miss hanging out with them, and I miss just, cracking jokes and telling stories. And I especially miss the ones that, that we've lost over time. Even Benoit, but especially, Owen and Canyon, from guys like that aren't here anymore. That's my fondest memory. That's what I miss the most, are the people. I don't miss anything else about it. I just miss the people.
Fantastic, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us and being so generous with your time. It's been really fun to go down memory lane with you. I hope you've enjoyed it.
I certainly did. Anytime. You know the contact stuff, just let me know.